The lights of the arena burned bright against the Tokyo night sky. Inside, a roaring sea of fans created a living storm, thousands of hearts beating in rhythm, united by one anticipation, a war between two men who refused to back down. On one side of the ring stood Riel Casimero, the Filipino warrior known for his ferocity, unpredictability, and relentless hunger to prove he belonged among boxing's elite. His journey had never been easy, a career built from the dust of poverty, forged by rejection, and fueled by a spirit that refused to break. Every punch he threw was a story, the story of a boy who fought his way out of the dark streets of Ormoc, chasing a dream only he could see. On the opposite corner, stood Tomoki el Mexicanito Kameda, Japan's pride and precision. The youngest of the famous Kameda brothers, born into a dynasty of fighters, molded from childhood to carry the family name into history. He was smooth, sharp, and calculated, a boxer who believed that intelligence beats aggression, that patience destroys chaos. But tonight wasn't about patience. Tonight was about who wanted it more. The rivalry had been brewing for months, heated exchanges, interviews filled with fire, and promises of destruction. Kameda's fans claimed that Casimero was all talk. Casimero's followers said Kameda had never faced real power. As the cameras panned across the crowd, the sound of drums, cheers, and chants filled the air. Casimero. Casimero. Answered by Kameda. Kameda. In equal force. This was more than a boxing match. It was a collision of worlds: Japan versus the Philippines, calm precision versus wild fury, tradition versus rebellion. Casimero stood in his corner, his gloves pressed together, eyes fixed on his opponent. He could feel the electricity crawling up his spine, the weight of expectation resting on his shoulders. He whispered something under his breath in Tagalog, a short prayer, not for victory, but for the strength to unleash everything he trained for. Across from him, Kameda bounced lightly on his toes, his face unreadable. He studied Casimero's movements for weeks, the looping right hand, the feints, the unpredictable rhythm. But studying was one thing, surviving was another. As the ring announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, from the Philippines, Riel Casimero. And from Japan, Tomoki Kameda." The crowd exploded into a wall of sound that shook the canvas beneath their feet. In that moment, time slowed. Casimero exhaled. Kameda blinked once, his gloves rising. The bell hadn't rung yet, but the war had already begun, not in fists, but in eyes, energy, and belief. The bell rang sharp, metallic, slicing through the roar of the crowd. Casimero and Kameda stepped forward, eyes locked, gloves high. For a moment, there was silence in the noise, that eerie calm that lives in the space between anticipation and action. Kameda was first to move. His feet glided across the canvas like water, smooth, controlled, precise. He extended a light jab, testing range, studying reaction. Casimero smiled a dangerous grin as he tilted his head slightly, eyes burning. The Filipino didn't rush. He was reading, feeling, absorbing. His body twitched with faint feints, small movements meant to confuse. The crowd reacted to every flicker of his shoulders. Then snap! Kameda's jab landed clean on Casimero's guard. Another. Then another. Casimero took them with a nod, unfazed. He was downloading data, studying Kameda's rhythm, waiting for a mistake. Midway through the round, Casimero exploded forward, a sudden burst, right hand whipping through the air. It missed by inches, the wind of it brushing Kameda's cheek. The crowd gasped. Kameda smirked, throwing a counter left hook that just grazed Casimero's chin. The fight had found its rhythm, skill versus chaos. The bell rang again. Kameda returned to his corner, calm, breathing evenly. Casimero sat down hard on the stool, grinning at his coach. "He can't run forever," he said quietly. Scorecards leaned slightly toward Kameda 10-9, the sharper man early. But everyone watching could feel it. Casimero was coiling like a spring. Casimero came out different this time, less patience, more presence. His gloves were high, shoulders rolling, eyes alive with energy. He began to cut the ring, trapping Kameda's movement. Each step forward was deliberate, like a hunter circling prey. Kameda fired his jab, but Casimero slipped under and unleashed a right to the body. Thud. The sound echoed like a drum. Kameda's back foot lifted slightly, he felt that one. Casimero didn't stop. He attacked again, a looping left hook, followed by an uppercut. The punches didn't all land, but the intent was unmistakable. The crowd roared as Casimero forced Kameda to clinch for the first time. "Break!" yelled the referee. They separated, and Kameda went back to movement, jabbing, circling, staying smart. His combinations were clean, textbook perfect. But Casimero wasn't reading textbooks. He was writing chaos. In the final 30 seconds, Casimero feinted a jab, then fired a wild overhand right. It connected, grazing Kameda's temple. The Japanese star staggered slightly, his balance momentarily gone. The arena erupted. Casimero! Casimero! The bell saved Kameda. He walked back to his corner shaking his head, knowing he'd just been reminded that this fight wasn't going to be a chess match. Casimero smiled again. His corner shouted, "Now he feels you. Keep that pressure." That round went to the Filipino 10-9 Casimero. The tension in the arena was alive now. You could feel it in the chants, in the stomping of feet on concrete, in the trembling cameras. Kameda began round 3 aggressively, determined to re-establish control. He fired crisp 1-2 combinations, landing several clean jabs to Casimero's face. But Casimero didn't blink. He absorbed them, laughed, and waved him forward. The crowd loved it, the raw energy, the taunting, the showmanship. Casimero switched stances briefly, throwing Kameda off rhythm. He launched a series of hooks, forcing the Japanese fighter backward. Each punch came from a different angle, unpredictable, wild but effective. Kameda countered beautifully, a straight right to the face, then a quick pivot to the left. The crowd cheered his composure, but Casimero responded instantly with a right uppercut that landed flush on the body. "Oh!" echoed through the crowd as Kameda gasped slightly. Casimero pressed forward, crowd screaming, blood pumping in every vein. He pinned Kameda near the ropes, unleashing a barrage left, right, left again. Most missed, but the few that connected had bad intentions. The bell rang, and this time, Kameda didn't immediately turn away. He stared at Casimero from across the ring, sweat dripping, chest heaving, pride stung. Casimero raised his glove slightly and smirked. The war had officially begun. The bell echoed once more, and by now, both fighters had tasted each other's power. Sweat glistened under the bright arena lights, and the crowd was fully awake, shouting, singing, recording every second on their phones. Kameda came out with renewed discipline. His corner had told him to box smart, not brave, and that's what he did. He began using his footwork to control distance, circling, firing sharp jabs and then escaping before Casimero could launch. Casimero, however, wasn't fooled. He stalked his opponent, cutting the ring more efficiently now, forcing exchanges. Every time Kameda tried to create space, Casimero was already there, closing the door.